Hi everybody, Jeremy here from Brew and Blooms. Today we're having ourselves a little impromptu brew session out back. We're going to use our grain father to do our mashing and our boiling. Then we're going to go into a conical fermenter over here afterwards to ferment in. We're going to be whipping ourselves up a beautiful little Irish Stout. So we decided not to build our water from RO or reverse osmosis water. We used a combination of our local tap water, and then RO water together. We're also going to utilize pH stabilizer 5.2 to keep that mash in the right pH range for us. So we're just going to take a tablespoon for a 5-gallon batch. Add it in there. Let that dissolve. Next we're going to cheat and use the pump to help it dissolve a little bit for us.
Jeremy's making granola.
Don't you want some? So our Irish Stout recipe consists of 5 pounds of pale British malt. We've got a pound of chocolate, a 1/4 pound of roasted barley, a pound of flaked barley, and 2 pounds of flaked oat to add that extra creaminess to it. So now, as we add, we're going to be adding, we're going to be adding it to the wrong thing if we put it in there. Let's put it where we're going to mash it instead. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we don't cause any dough balls. And actually, in the beginning, it's not too much of an issue because there's so much water versus grain. But as you get more and more in there, then you got to start thinking about maybe stopping. And yeah, we're still pretty good. But as you get more and more in there, you need to really be aware that we do not want to have any dough balls. That's why we add the grist to the water, not vice versa. So we're in good shape.
What ABV are you shooting for, Jeremy?
We're shooting for about a 4.5%. Nothing real crazy high. Oh, I forgot our hops and our yeast. We are using Willamette hops to make it the American Irish style, along with some Nottingham to keep it more on the English side. So we've just got a nice little conglomeration for our Irish Stout here today.
So this will be a nice, easy drinking Irish Stout without knocking you out, huh?
You should be able to drink more than one without having to worry about it. All right, so now we're starting to get a little bit thicker. Already smells awesome.
I wish this camera had smell-o-vision on it because it does smell incredible.
Just starting. That's the beautiful thing about it. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Sometimes it's hard to not get in a rush and pour too much in at once, but we want to make sure we're getting all of the flavors out of our grain. Sorry about that.
All good.
All right. Got all of our grain added. really feel any dough balls. Notice it's not so much of a stirring motion, but more of a cutting or a chopping motion. If I was doing more of a stirring motion at this point in time, I would just be moving around that dough ball versus breaking it up. All right, we're gonna get it up to temp.
So it's almost like making a soup. If somebody could make a soup, they could brew beer, huh?
Absolutely. It's a soup with another step or two.
So you just have to bring it up, add your grains in there, bring it up to temperature.
Mash your grain to get the conversion of the starch to a simple sugar that the yeast can eat down the road. So right now, this particular system has a recirculating. So as soon as we get up to our complete mash temperature, we're going to turn this pump on, and it's going to recirculate during our mash. And that'll help with our efficiency between the interaction of the water with the grain. So now what we've done is we've set a top plate on here to help dissipate the recirculating water as we're mashing our grain. All right, we've reached our mashing temperature, so we're going to turn our pump on and start recirculating. So if you see, we're going to turn the pump on. We're mashing at $1.53. We're trying to get that to kind of go around there. I'm trying to get it to spin around this to the best of our ability. So if you notice, now that we've got the pump running, we've already dropped a couple degrees, so it's gonna have to make that back up. Okay. So now we're getting a little bit high. We're gonna cut back the flow just a little bit. There we go.
Now how long will you leave it recirculate?
We're going to be mashing. We're going to be mashing for about 60 minutes, and then we'll take her out of there and bring her to a boil. So now we're going to put that lid on in there to help hold the heat.
So we'll do that for an hour?
Yep.
And then come back to it and pull the grain out and start the boil?
Well, we'll sparge. We'll rinse our grain off of any excess flavor and sugars that we want to catch, and then we'll bring that guy to a boil from there. Okay, so now we've been mashing for about a half hour, 35 minutes. We're gonna get our sparge water going up to temp. We're gonna be sparging at 167 to stop the conversion, and then we're going to rinse off the flavors and the sugars from our grain and get her up to boil. So we're going to sparge with approximately 4 gallons of water, and we're going to collect about 6, 5 3/4. We're going to boil off about half a gallon of that, give or take, to end up with about 5 1/4 gallons in our fermenter. So that way we're going to end up with a good 5-gallon batch of beer to bottle up, or keg up in our case. All right, so now we're finished with our mash out. We're at 167 here. We've got 167 on our sparge water. With the grain father, you take and you lift the basket out and give it a nice little spin. Oh. We try to remember to shut the pump off before we unhook it. Now we're just going to slowly raise her on out of there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Give her a quick little spin. Now we're going to start to rinse her off. Sparge our grains here. We can actually raise this up to a boil. As we're finishing out our sparge. It's not going to affect the grain that we're sparging. There's no heat's going to be touching that. It's just going to be our sparge water still. So now we're going to take a quick pre-boil hydrometer reading to get an idea of how much fermentables we've got going on in our vessel. We ended up collecting a little more wort than what we really intended on. So it's probably going to be a little bit lower than what we really intended. There's a couple different things that we can do. We can run with that ABV and do our boil like we had intended, or we could boil it down a little bit more, so that way we have a little higher ABV along with flavor profile. So now we're going to add our hydrometer. Oop, looks like we took too much here. Let's try this again. Let's set our hydrometer in there, give her a spin. So we're sitting at about 1025. We should be at about 1035 to 1040. So that extra gallon, 3/4 of a gallon that we collected, definitely had an effect on our hydrometer reading. So then we just have to make the executive decision. How do we want to go about it? Do we want to have a little more beer at a lower ABV, or do we want to have the size that we were talking about at approximately the ABV we were talking about? Because then we would have to boil just a little bit longer. So we're going to add a couple ounces of our Willamette hops now. We're going to end up using a little strainer bag, so that way we don't have all of the hops just kind of loosely floating around in there. The amount of hops that we're using versus the size of the bag should not be any issue. We got to be careful to make sure that we still get great interaction between our wort and our hops as we're boiling. So if I was going to put you know, 5 or 6 ounces in this little bag, probably wouldn't make sense to use this size of bag. But yep, that's what we're going to do now. And we're going to set her right in there, put her under the clip so that way it doesn't sink. And that would be our boil hop. That would be our boil hop addition. This particular recipe, we're not going to be adding any aroma hops. The aroma is mainly going to come from that little bit of roasted barley and chocolate malt that we added during our mashing. So we ended up with about a 75-minute boil or so to get down to the volume that we were looking for. Now we've got our counterflow chiller on there. We're going to be running some of the hot wort through there for about 10-15 minutes to sanitize this guy. And then we'll start chilling it down and getting it ready to go into our sanitized fermenter. So there, we're pumping that hot wort through the coil. Gonna take a little bit of time. Oh, there we go. Now we're pouring it back into. It's probably pretty hard to see with all of the condensation that's happening right now. We'll let that go for a little bit. So now we are at the cooling stage. We've got our counterflow chiller sanitized. We're running cool water into the counterflow chiller and getting very hot water coming out. Actually, we're going to cut it back a little bit more because we could probably pull a little more heat if we didn't run quite so much water so fast through it. So now that we've got our fermenter sanitized and ready to take our cooled wort, we are pumping our cooled wort into our fermenter. After we get our 5.5 gallons or so, we're going to end up sanitizing our package of yeast and pitching our yeast on it. We chose not to rehydrate our Nottingham yeast today. The ABV and the aggressiveness of the ABV tolerance, the aggressiveness of Nottingham, we should have no problems fermenting this all the way out. All right, so now it's time for the good part. We're gonna be pitching our yeast onto our wort. So we gotta make sure that the yeast container itself is sanitized. We gotta sanitize the scissors that we use to cut it open with. just to be on the safe side. We've gone all this time to make sure everything's clean and sanitary. Let's not ruin it right. So just a quick little splash, a little color. Get ready to... We've got our airlock already sitting in our sanitizer solution. So now we've got our packet opened. We are ready to pitch. We've got her pitched. We're going to get our airlock with sanitizer solution in there. And now, the art of it all. So I pushed too hard. I pushed it through there. You gotta be real careful to make sure you don't do what I just did. So now we've got it snug enough to get an airlock, but we're not pushing it through. That's it. We've just made ourselves a batch of beer. We'll get this guy fermented out in a week or so, and we'll keg her up. Thanks for watching.